like this. Okay, so today we're talking about regenerative medicine, part 2. When will the current Wild West period end, and what should we do in the meantime? And Astgik Petrosyan will be joining me. Yeah.
Hello, Dr. Solez.
Hello, she's already here. Yay!
Yes.
Okay, cool. Excellent, excellent. So you've all been through part 1, and so what I wanted to kind of remind you of is the history here and the analogy between the start of clinical transplantation and the start of clinical regenerative medicine. So in 1954, the first kidney transplant was done between identical twins at Massachusetts General Hospital, and that's what that picture is showing. And then there was a long period during which transplantation was extremely controversial and dangerous, and many of the patients died and so on. It really didn't completely work until the advent of cyclosporin. So this is a picture, a 3D picture of cyclosporin molecule in 1983. And that's around the time that I started doing transplant pathology research. So I was a part of the cyclosporin trials. I was not much part of transplant research before then. And cyclosporin was so much better than the other agents that suddenly transplantation became safe and routine and a legitimate mainstream part of medicine. But there was a long period, you see, almost 30 years, during which transplantation was in this Wild West period of being a thing that people were trying, but it wasn't routine and was not really in widespread use. And the same is kind of true of regenerative medicine, but you might expect that the Wild West period would be shorter, right? Because it's this exponential change thing that we talk about in the course, Moore's law, about how the future is going faster than the past and so on, which might mean that perhaps regenerative medicine would reach routine clinical practice even for complex organs in less than 30 years from the sort of start. It's kind of hard to identify when the start was, because for simple tissues, like let's say cartilage, skin, and bone, regenerative medicine already is routine and works pretty well. It's just that those aren't very sexy organs. What would really impress people is when we could use stem cell generated kidneys or livers or hearts, and those would work. And what do we mean by work? It isn't just what they look like, but also how they function. And at the present time, it's pretty easy to do stem cell generated hearts, and they beat like a heart's supposed to do, but it's a really namby-pamby, weak beat. It isn't a strong, vigorous beat. And of course, what heart needs to do needs a strong, vigorous beat. Yeah, and the other thing, of course, is that Moore's law is muted in medicine for a lot of reasons. Progress is not really moving as rapidly in clinical medicine as in the rest of science because of the heavy regulatory and safety considerations. So for that reason, it might take longer for this Wild West period to end. And this is the same slide as in, I think, the first lecture that I gave you, just showing why that is, that Moore's law is muted and not moving as fast in medicine as in other areas of science. And it's hard to know where to draw the line in the sand. When you're making a new organ from stem cells, when is it good enough? You know, like it has traditionally been taught, there are 26 cell types in the kidney. We're thinking that in virtually every organ, single cell transcriptomics will identify twice as many cell types as we thought there were before. But anyway, let's take the assumption that there are 26 cell types. And so does your stem cell generated organ have to contain all 26 cell types? And do all those cell types have to be in the right place and in the right number? And so, for instance, in the kidney, do you need the cells that make renin and renal erythropoietic factor? Do you need every single one of those cell types? Do they all need to be in the usual places? What if they're all there, but some are in unusual places, like podocytes in the glomeruli ordinarily are only in glomeruli, certain area, certain location. But we know that at least in rodent models of stem cell generated kidneys, podocytes go wandering in the interstitium, like they thought they were lymphocytes or monocytes or something. Yes. So is that a problem? How perfectly does the stem cell generated organ need to regenerate, need to reflect the structure of the normal organ? And so we talked about that a bit last time. That's why there will be a thing like the new BAMP classification of tissue engineering pathology, because there'll need to be decisions made about that. Just like today, we need to decide when something goes wrong with a transplanted organ, is it rejecting, and how badly, and in what way is the rejection being mediated, or is something else happening? Is there an infection? You know, what else is happening? Most of those things will not afflict the stem cell generated organ, but that organ is unlikely to be absolutely normal in structure, and we'll have to decide how close is close enough, you know? So there will be those questions. And maybe we do not need to feel embarrassed if the classification reflects some kind of startling entities that we hope won't occur very often. Like the current classification of transplantation diseases still includes hyperacute rejection and perfusion injury, even though those things just hardly ever occur. Or let's say, like, I haven't seen a case in the past 10 or 15 years. So eventually, some of the things going wrong in stem cell generated organs also will become vanishingly rare, and the remaining things will not threaten the long-term life of the organ the way those really severe changes do. But there is a striking similarity between hyperacute rejection which was a big problem in the beginning of transplantation, and the big problem with the major vessels remaining patent in stem cell generated organs. And so with many ways of decellularizing and recellularizing organs, the recellularizing of most of the organ goes pretty well, but the pavementing of the endothelium on the main artery and vein going to and from the organ doesn't work so well. It's really hard to get more than about 80% of the endothelium of those big vessels covered with covering the vessel surface, and the areas that lack endothelium clot like crazy. So you've got this beautiful stem cell generated organ, and everything looks great, and you hook it up and the artery and vein clot and nothing works, right? So it is obviously a fixable problem. Compared to the really challenging problems in science, that's such a simple problem, right? I mean, we don't quite know how to completely solve it, but it seems so structurally simple that obviously in the next few years, we will solve that. But that is the reason why there's such interest in organoids. And if you haven't heard about them yet, you will, because a lot of people talking about regenerative medicine can't make complex organs yet that will work, but they can make organoids. So you can make little pieces of complex organs and keep all the cells alive, and they do some of the stuff that the complex organs do. And you can use them for toxicity studies, right? Of what things are toxic to that organ and so on. But they can't do the big job of the organ because of this problem with the large main artery and main vein remaining patent. So there's a relationship, and you'll get some people in regenerative medicine complaining about how boring they find presentations about organoids. But on the other hand, you can learn a tremendous amount by studying organoids. So yeah, it's an area that you'll probably come to have an opinion on about whether organoid studies are great or whether it's really frustrating that we can't get further. There's another kind of mystery in regenerative medicine for most organs, which is it's really hard to figure out where the stem cell niche is and where the stem cells come from. They sort of magically appear, but you don't know where. And so that's one exciting thing about the GI tract, that because the GI tract is turning over so quickly, the stem cells are really obvious and everybody knows where they are and you can see them and they're a real thing. Whereas, for instance, in the kidney, it's only relatively recently been identified that at least one main stem cell niche is the renal papilla, the sort of most innermost part of the medulla. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but like these pointy parts here. Yeah. And that harkens back to older times because in the kidney medicine of the 1960s, let us say, or the 1970s, papillary necrosis was a big deal. You may have heard the phrase, take a powder, but probably you haven't because people haven't been talking about that for a long time. But like workers in factories, rather than taking, let's say, a coffee break, would take a powder break. They'd scoop up this powder that contained aspirin, phenacetin, and caffeine, give them a pickup, kind of what coffee does, only different. But this stuff was very toxic to the renal papilla. And so those workers who took a lot of these powders got papillary necrosis. And it was a very important kind of kidney disease back in those decades, which is almost unheard of today. Nobody sees cases of analgesic nephropathy anymore. It just does not occur. But the only interesting thing about it is that it gave a lot of focus to the renal papilla because it was a specific disease of that part of the kidney. And it turns out that that's where the stem cells are hanging out, or one of the places where they hang out. Yeah, so this just says on that slide, but I just said that it was a very important kidney disease in the past, not important anymore. Yeah, so this is just kind of one example of thinking, well, how would regenerative medicine be manifest? And I think that for bone, cartilage, and skin, to some extent, you have things like this biopen and so on, where you can just kind of draw in what you need. You need some more cells there, and you can sprinkle some cells and the cells grow and everything. But for more complex organs, it's still a bit of a puzzle. So a historic moment occurred in December 2016, or at least I think so. I don't know whether Astgik thinks so, but we're working in a fairly rarefied area of science. They're not like thousands and thousands of people interested in the subjects that we're interested in. So we had this electronic poster on the new Banff classification of tissue engineering pathology at the TERMIS meeting, Tissue Engineering Regenerative Medicine International Society meeting in San Diego, December 2016. And so Khulud, Saliba, and I got to our poster early, and we're wondering, who's going to come, and there was Astgik Petrosyan. And you say, oh, okay, but she was like in the line? No, I don't think so. I think she was the only person waiting for us, but she asked us a lot of good questions and so on. So that's how Astgik and I met, and we have done a lot of fun stuff since then. So I'm now the chair of the Transplant Regenerative Medicine Community of Practice in the American Society of Transplantation. And Astgik is a part of our executive, and she began as a trainee member. Yeah, so so that's the history there. And I suddenly learned from Astgik that this business I was talking about, the new Banff classification of tissue engineering pathology, was going to be way more complicated than I thought, because there's so many different possibilities of the way you can seed cells and different kinds of matrices and so on. So Astgik is a real expert in this idea of the extracellular matrix. And so what I thought, I'm big on artificial intelligence, and whenever I see a problem in the world, I think of how AI can fix it, right? So I don't really know if it's true that this is another problem that AI will likely fix, but it seems to me there are a bit too many variables for lowly humans to figure it all out in the end, to figure out what is the best recipe for producing a stem cell generated complex organ of various types. And I would think that eventually artificial intelligence would be used to sort that out. Yeah, so these last slides are Astgik's, and I think she can start talking now and give you this last bit. So.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to touch up on the complexities of tissue engineering, generating de novo kidney. So we have had some delays because of the complexities. We've initially believed by decellularizing whole human kidneys and then adding the cells on top of them, we would be able to generate them. But as Dr. Solez mentioned, it's highly complicated. There's various cell types. We need to understand how to appropriately deposit the correct cell types in their correct location so they could actually function. So with that, there has been some delays and advancements, but moving forward with regenerative medicine, has been a lot of advancements in new techniques. For example, extracellular vesicles have become a huge point in regenerative medicine, where you do not need to actually administer the stem cells to regenerate parts of the body. You could extract the extracellular vesicles that the stem cells secrete, and you could concentrate them and give it to patients as a form of drug therapy. That way we eliminate the need to actually implant foreign cells into another human being, which could have secondary repercussions in the long term. There has also been the idea of 3D printing, which is again a bit complicated. As Dr. Solez mentioned, the vasculature system is very, very important. So we need to have the correct endothelial cells in their correct location for blood flow to occur. So when we're 3D printing these organs, we need to consider the vasculature. We also need to consider the nervous system. So not only do we have to recreate the organ to function properly, but we have to also incorporate it with the vasculature and the nervous system. As you can imagine, it becomes more complicated. There has been attempts to 3D print simple structures like the trachea. But again, we need to understand the different types of biomaterials that are present that are not going to initiate an immune response, that are going to last long enough and allow our body to function with it, but can somehow be mildly degradable so our body could kind of regenerate it, incorporate it in there. So moving forward,
yeah.
If you don't.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, this is sort of old-fashioned in the way that we're going to the next slide. Let me see.
I just wanted to introduce a piece of our new publication, which is basically designing a component of the kidney in vitro in order to study diseases and study effects of drugs. So one of the biggest technologies right now is generating chips. So they attempt to generate chips of the kidney, of the heart, different parts of the bodies. For this example, we actually created a glomerulus on a chip. One of the main functions of the kidney is to filter our blood. And the two components, two cell types that are very important in making sure proper blood filtration occur are the podocytes, like Dr. Solez mentioned, and the glomerular endothelial cells. Now, these cells are not just the typical endothelial cells, they're specific for the kidney in interaction with the podocytes. When they interact, they create a perfect barrier that's called the glomerular basement membrane, which has the perfect type of extracellular matrix you need for proper blood filtration to occur. So what we used was the Momentous technology, which is a 3-lane system, where in the upper lane in C is where we initially deposit the glomerular endothelial cells, the glomerular podocytes. And then a day later, we allow the endothelial cells to interact with the podocytes. And this way we allowed them to interact and generate the barrier. And as you can see, it's highly complex. In the images following it is an immunohistochemistry showing the deposition of the different extracellular matrix components, such as collagen 4, alpha 3, and laminin alpha 5. And this is another important note, is that we need to have the appropriate matrix, because if the filtration barrier is missing any of its proper components of the collagen 4, alpha 3, 4, and 5, and laminin alpha 5, they're not going to be able to filter properly. In fact, there are genetic diseases such as Alport syndrome, where a mutation in the collagen causes the patients to slowly lose kidney function, and eventually they need a kidney transplant. And sorry, next slide. And what's cool about this technology is we could also create an actual filtration barrier and measure it. We could test if the podocytes are able to filter properly, or if the podocytes are damaged, are they going to have a leaky membrane? So this type of technology advancements allows us to really test drug therapy, because one of the main concerns with drugs is it directly affects the kidney. So with this, we could administer in the top channel whatever we want to test. And then over time, we could test if it actually damaged the filtration barrier. And this way we would know if it's toxic for the kidney, the specific drugs. Or we could create a chip with diseased podocytes and then test drugs and see if it actually helps recreate the filtration barrier. So yeah, with that, thank you for having me, Dr. Solez.
Sure. Yeah, no, so some of you are aware that the first BAMF classification meeting was in this building shown here, the Trans-Canada Pipeline Pavilion at the BAMF Center. And we had mule deer coming to the door of the meeting room. And we also had children. The other thing that, you know, it was the early days of the meeting, and we hadn't really organized childcare. So these speakers and the people taking part in the meeting had their kids there, and there was very comical interaction between, you know, the mule deer poking their heads into the door of the meeting room and the children there. So we've come a long way since then, but we also have a long way to go, and it's been sort of fun. So I just wanted to mention some other things that you're probably aware of. You know that, well, for many of you, this is just another course, nothing special. Some of you get kind of hooked and need a fix of the course at all times of the year, including during the summer between the fall term and the winter term. And so we have devised this thing called The Future and All That Jazz, which is an extension of the course where we take important areas of science, but maybe areas you might not sit still for a lecture on, like regenerative medicine safety, and yeah, things like that, and also artificial intelligence safety, and put those things in poetry and music and entertain people with that. And yeah, so in 2017, after that historic meeting that we had in 2016, we were the main entertainment for the Termis meeting that year, which was in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. So you can see all the fancy cars in the background there. So it was Mallory Chipman's band and me, and then 4 of Edmonton's best poets. Yeah, and so I have also discovered something that I think you can all now be a part of, maybe if it works, and that is that Zoom has a new feature. Since the end of April, they have had Zoom Immersive Views. And this allows everybody on Zoom to be in the same room, same virtual room, and it's really cool. And what is numerically cool about it is that those rooms accommodate 25 people, and there are exactly 25 of us, because there are 9 regular students, 8 medical students, 7 TAs, and me, right? So anyway, so I thought, let me unshare now and see what we're able to do. So let me, okay, first of all, I'm gonna go full screen. Okay, now let's see what happens if I go immersive. Let's see, okay. So I think the option, this option, see if we can do that. Yeah, so now I think, you wait a moment, all of you now are in the same room, eh? Isn't that cool? Yeah. So it varies a little bit, but you know, it gives you a different, you know, experience. It may be better or worse than regular Zoom, but it's different. And so very proud to be able to do that today. And of course, suddenly it matters a lot whether you're close to the screen or farther away. Yeah, so you can make yourself bigger in everybody's consciousness closer to the screen, eh? Yeah, but yeah, so I'm kind of proud that the advances in Zoom technology seem to be ones that make what we're doing work better. Like I think we were the first people to present the idea of using Zoom virtual backgrounds as a way of you know, presenting a lecture. So rather than using slides, to have like use the 16 options of the Zoom virtual backgrounds basically as your slides. And as you know, good slide sets shouldn't have very many words on the slides. And if you're using Zoom backgrounds, there are probably very few words. But anyway, so we presented that on Future Day, which is March 1st. One of the things you learn in this course is there is a holiday or will be a holiday. Anyway, there's a thing that we call Future Day on March 1st. And by August 1st, Zoom had changed the way virtual backgrounds work so that it was exactly the same on Mac and PC, which is really what you'd need if people were going to routinely do presentations using virtual Zoom backgrounds, because you don't want to be completely different cross-platform. I have no idea whether they did that because of us or just because it was a good idea. But also, I think there will be days when most of you are on Zoom and most of you have your video on and so on, where we can really fill up this virtual immersive Zoom room. I can show you some of the other options. So let's see if we do change immersive view. Yeah, this is one of the other. Yeah, so this is another way of doing it, but I think it's somehow less pleasing. Let's try that. Yeah, so that this, yeah, it looks more fake somehow, right? The other virtual background looks almost real, whereas this looks more. But this one gives me a special role, right? So I'm somebody different, right? Whereas in the other one, everybody's equal. Yeah, so there are some other different features. And if you're doing Zooms with between 2 and 6 people, then there are lots of options. There are lots of you know, immersive options for 2 people and so on. So you might want to try that out. Yeah. So, okay. So rather than me spending all the time in class celebrating this, why don't we go back to talking about the lecture? Why don't you guys ask it and me some questions? Yeah. Or comments or whatever you wish. Yeah. Bring it on. Questions, comments? Well, you know what? You might think I have nothing prepared if there are no comments, but that's not true, because the poem that I sent you all has a certain fan base now, right? There are people who really like the poem, and they will not be satisfied until I read the poem on Zoom. So I'm going to read that now while you're thinking of these really smart questions. Bioengineered kidneys imperfections turning black are like hyperacute rejections of 50 years back. Like hyperacute, that's hyper astute. Bioengineered kidneys give history a reboot. In 1968, the New England Journal had this gleaming knowledge kernel about kidneys that function briefly amazingly, and then swelled with inflammation and clotted like crazy. The problem was ultimately solved, and so completely resolved that now rejections hyperacute are still in the classification, but never occurring, just as will happen with some of today's spectacular bioengineering erring. We will classify these stunning morphologies, but with time, there will be tautologies about why they never occur anymore and why the present mild lesions are such a bore. So be happy you are living in interesting times, morphologically, with big problems you will help to solve by constructing matrices so perfect methodologically that all bioengineering problems are resolved. And later, you and the organs live happily ever after, telling stories of the present period with peals of laughter. Okay, so thus endeth the poem. Yeah. Okay, so now we need some good questions, ladies and gentlemen. You can't just sit in this immersive room and be completely silent. You gotta, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not really a great question. I'm a computing scientist, so I don't know, like the past two lectures have just been very boggling for my mind because bodies, I don't work with bodies. But I want to ask, like, why is there the focus on the kidney right now? Is there a specific reason, or is it just because there's a lot of problems with it?
Part of it is because I'm a kidney person.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Because the kidney is like the moonshot. It's the hardest organ to get right in regenerative medicine. Because if you take the liver by comparison, probably the kidney and liver are equally complicated. But if you just mix up all the cells in the liver and keep the cells alive, they do something useful. If you mix up all the cells in the kidney and keep the cells alive, they don't really do anything useful. They have to be in the right sequence and in the right place and so on. And there are these exquisite structures and membranes and stuff that have to all be organized properly. So that's why it's the hardest organ. It's the most complex, hardest organ to create.
Okay.
And yeah, so it is greatest challenge out there in terms of complex organs.
So I'm guessing that's why Astgik was saying Astgik. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
It's
That's
okay.
why
It's
you were
difficult.
saying like that the structure is so important, right? Because
Yeah.
if you mess up
Yes.
anything, it's like, oh God,
Yes.
problems. Okay. Thank you.
Also, with the kidney, it has limited regeneration capacity, and
Right.
the most people right now on the waiting for a transplant are waiting for a kidney.
Oh,
It's
that's
the
true.
number one organ they are waiting for, and components of the kidney, like the nephron and where blood filtration occurs, because the main function, amongst other functions, is to filter our blood, is the nephron, and components of that particular structure are never regenerated. So you're born with a set number of filtration units, and over time, as they break down, that's why we have two kidneys, because there's support. Over time, they break down, and certain individuals are born with more and certain individuals are born with less.
I see.
And certain drugs could cause damage to the kidney. People with diabetes have damage to the kidney. So a lot of things could lead to damage to the kidney, but we can't fix it very well. That's the issue.
Okay. Oh, that's scary. Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Drink lots of water.
So any other questions?
There's some hands up.
Matt, yes.
Hey, yeah, I was just wondering about the glomerulus on a chip. I was just wondering about, or I was just going to ask if we could maybe get a bit more detail about how it functions, I guess kind of what the issues are with that technology and what the future advances are going to look like.
So with the glomerulus on a chip technology, the idea, there are individuals working on creating artificial kidneys. And they basically allow certain types of cells with certain types of membrane to allow proper blood filtration to occur. So they're still working on this. But this particular technology allows the most important cell types, the two cell types that are important for the blood filtration, which are the podocytes and the glomerular endothelial cells. And it's very, very important we have the correct endothelial cells, because if you don't have the correct endothelial cells, then the podocytes cannot communicate with them. So basically, this system allows, it's a 3-lane system, and in the upper lane, we deposit the glomerular endothelial cells, and then we deposit the podocytes, and they interact with one another, creating the filtration barrier. So in order for proper filtration to occur, it's basically extracellular matrix, important barrier they have to make to allow size exclusion, charge exclusion, for a proper ability to filter our blood. So this system allows them to interact with one another and create this, they create the barrier. So then we could begin to test drugs and to see if it causes the damage between the barrier, or they're able to maintain it, or if there's issues with the cell types. Let's say we're working with diabetic podocytes or diabetic glomerular endothelial cells. We could see if we give certain drugs, if we could bring them back to life to behave a little bit better and recreate the barrier better. So in the upper lane, we could deposit our drugs, we could deposit our treatment, and then the bottom lane, we could collect and measure if in fact we are damaging that barrier or not. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, it did, yeah. So like, does that technology only have an in vitro application of testing different drug types and the interaction between the cell types, or in like future iterations will it be used like in vivo as well?
Absolutely. Right now, this is in vitro, but this would allow the design of in vivo systems, because it allows us to understand how to create the proper channels, how to allow the cells to interact with each other, what is their lifespan. So we could begin to use the system to design better systems for in vivo systems. So like I said, in San Francisco, they are trying to create the artificial kidney for implantation. And they've been working on this for a long time. And they're trying to understand what are the cell types that they could deposit in these structures and allow the blood to be filtered properly. I believe right now they're working with tubular cells, which is another component of the nephron. So basically we have the glomeruli where the blood goes through and then you have further filtration in the tubules. So every excess liquid is placed back in. It regulates the body's salt content. So you need the whole nephron to function properly. So this kind of gives us a little bit of insight of what we really need and how important they are. But it's like Dr. Solez said, the kidney is highly complex architecturally and different cell types and their inability to regenerate fully. So we have a lot of issues to conquer.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just last follow-up, like, would you say what's probably the biggest obstacle that needs to be overcome before, you know, the development of transplantable organs?
I would say we would need to have the appropriate cell types. Podocytes are very rare. It's very difficult to have them in culture. There has been many research on the different types of podocytes we could have, their lifespan. So it is difficult to fully differentiate those particular cell types from stem cells, let's say. So it's identifying the appropriate cells and making sure that they actually are functioning properly. And also the second barrier would be the membrane, understanding where to place the cells.
So I see that the hand raising function works, eh? See, even in this, yeah. So you have a question? No. So whose hand is that?
That's mine.
Oh, okay, sorry. So it works, but it's hard to figure out whose hand is whose. Okay, yeah.
It's a little off to the side, but that's okay. Okay, so my question is kind of about the organoids. So I saw this on Grey's Anatomy, so I'm sure there's not that much like scientific, like actual like relevance to it, but it kind of reminded me of it where like she had a patient who ruptured their spleen or something, and so to fix it she put like mini spleens in the like all over the abdomen basically. So instead of having the one giant spleen that needs like the great big arterial and venous supply, it was a bunch of mini spleens that could do with like capillaries or smaller arterioles. And so I'm just wondering, is that kind of what like how we can envision organoids, or like is that something that could be in real life possible, or was that like 100% like medical drama?
Well, sure. If you think about islet cell transplantation, you can certainly do that by injecting islet cells into, let's say, under the kidney capsule or liver capsule, and you get a whole bunch of, you know, individual cells that are all making insulin. So there certainly are instances where you can take the function of an organ where you used to have all the cells together and have the cells widely separated, but they still do useful things. But it depends on what the function is. A lot of the things that the kidney does would not work like that. You can't have a single cell doing it. You have to have a lot of different cells working in, you know, cooperation. And one of the things that's maybe hardest to perfect may not be necessary, some people are now thinking, and that is the ability to concentrate the urine. So the medullary osmotic gradient, you can imagine a lot of ways in which you could make stem cell generated kidneys where everything would be okay except that you wouldn't have long loops of Henle and, you know, that nice medullary osmotic gradient. So the kidney may be able to do everything else, but not concentrate the urine. But we think there would be other ways to, you know, provide that service. So you don't just pee out your whole body water in a few hours. Yeah, so probably that's something we could live with. if we create a kidney that can do everything else, but it cannot concentrate the urine as well as the normal kidney.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
So on the topic of organoids as well, in like a research process, would organoids be used, I guess, like before a model organism is used?
Before a model organ. Yeah. So, I mean, like, first of all, you might say, well, why are you generating the stem cell generated organ? Are you really going to put it in somebody, or are you using it as kind of a model to see what is toxic to the kidney? So you don't have to use animal testing any longer. It's sort of like, you know, the vegan answer to animal testing.
But like,
right?
would that wholly replace the animal component, or like, would it be like okay, first you do an organoid research trial, and then based on those results, you do an animal model, and then you do a human trial?
Well, no, I think it depends on what kind of toxicity you're talking about. At the two ends of the spectrum, where the compound is not toxic to the organoid at all, or whether it does something terrible, those two ends would probably avoid having to do whole animal testing. But if you're in the middle, where the compound has some possibly toxic effects, but you're not really sure, then you might still have to use whole animal testing.
Okay. And then also, would it be like, I'm thinking, would they do like 2 organoid sampling of like one with like human organoids and then one with like the model organism? Would that be like a more comprehensive like comparison? Or would there maybe not even be that much of a difference since you're growing them in the same media?
Yeah, there are just so many options. I mean, when you think of humanized pigs, right? So, you know, genetically modified pigs that are lacking a lot of the antigens that humans react to and stuff. So I think in the future there will probably be a sort of hybrid mix of use of animal cells versus human cells, that at least to study toxicity in the beginning, there's enough crossover that things that are very, very toxic, say to the, you know, pig kidney or the, you know, pig organoid, probably also would be to humans.
Good, thank you.
So other questions? Yeah, so let me ask you, what's your reaction to this, you know, immersive view? You think this is this, you know, improving the course, or you never want to come back to this again, or somewhere in between? What do you think?
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I
I like it. It just cuts out the like the people in the class from your iPad camera. That's the only thing, but other than that, it's really nice.
I don't think they're completely cut out. They're just very, very small, right? Like, you know, yeah, no. Samadhi from the iPad camera is not completely cut out. She's just like 1/10 the size of the rest of you. Yeah, so she's still there. Yeah, we'll get it right. So if the iPad was very close to her, then it would still work in that way. But then we could only look at one student at a time from the room here. So yeah. Anyway, it is kind of cool how it's giving some green screen effects without green screen, like the area around me isn't really more pure than the area around some of you, right? That it's also creating a nice sharp outline. So it is pretty good technology, I would say. And for those of you using static pictures, it just uses the static pictures. So yeah, it's working. And I think it'll follow the same rules, like it's showing names here, but I bet that the names won't be in the recorded version, just like on regular Zoom calls. The black boxes all have names for the people actually participating, but they don't have it in the recorded version. So yeah, okay. Well, you're very welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. You know, I wouldn't mind letting you guys leave early because we had a very short presentation. But anyway, thanks for being part of this. And Astgik, thank you very much for taking part. And it was a good experiment in a lot of ways. Yeah, and so we'll keep on trying this immersive view in future teaching sessions. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay, that's it for today then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.